What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And yes, today is another one of those days. It's time for another episode of Hey Chris on the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And Chris is here with us, but surprisingly, he's not in Houston as the Cavs face off with the Rockets on Wednesday. It is Tuesday. Chris, I think before we get into any of the questions, you got to go through the craziness of the NBA schedule, traveling, and especially how the weather has been acting a little lately.
This is year 11 for me on the beat, Ethan, and this is the first time that I can think of where I'm actually worried about, am I going to get into the city in time for the game? I've never had this before. I had a flight scheduled for earlier this afternoon that was going to take me into Houston. That one got canceled about 2 days ago in anticipation of the winter storm. So I was able to change my flight to a little bit later in the day. And then last night I got the notification that one got canceled too. And then I tried to find a later flight for Tuesday night, and there weren't any. They completely shut down the airport in Houston after midnight. There's a reason why the Cavs left right after the game against the Suns, because the rule was if they were going to be able to get into Houston, they had to get to the airport before midnight, because the plan in Houston was to shut down the airport at midnight. So basically Monday morning. And here we are. Tuesday morning. So now here we are, still in Cleveland, hoping, praying that my flight that is booked for early tomorrow morning, first thing Wednesday, that one's going to take off as scheduled. That one's actually going to allow me to get to Houston, that they've reopened their airport at some point. I was talking to a few different people who made it to Houston with the Cavs, and they said it is sunny, the snow is melting, and there's signs of humanity again because people are actually going out and about in Houston. But you know how this goes. Houston's not used to this. I think this is the most snow that they've gotten since 1960. 1960! And it's only 4 to 6 inches. If we're talking about Cleveland, Ohio, that's nothing. That's a dusting in Cleveland. Don't even have to bring out the snowblower for that. Maybe not even have to bring out the shovel for 4 to 6 inches. But in Houston, 4 to 6 inches of snow, that shuts down the airport completely, that shuts down the city, transportation, very, very minimal. Hotel rates jacked up through the roof. So we're just crossing our fingers, crossing our toes that I'm going to be able to get there in time for tomorrow's game against the Rockets. Ethan, I always get there the night before. That's how I do this. I want to get there. I want to get settled. I want to be in the city, not have any kind of stress, travel, anything like that. Now I'm wondering, one, am I going to land in Houston in time for shoot around on Wednesday morning? And two, am I going to land in Houston at some point in time for tip-off against the Rockets? So it's a very, very interesting situation, and I feel very, very thrown off of my routine. You know this about me. I'm very routine-oriented. My son is very routine-oriented. My wife is very routine-oriented. So me still being in Cleveland, knowing that there's a basketball game in Houston, Texas tomorrow, it's a very queasy feeling that I have in the pit of my stomach right now.
Yeah, so we're just going to have to hope and pray that you get there safely, get there on time. The worst thing would be a delay, because we know how you would freak out with that. So either cancel the flight or let them get on it. And I don't even want to ask which airline you're going on, because we don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But, Chris, we do want to...
It's Houston International Airport.
True.
They just decided that they don't want to be open. They shut down completely. They don't have snow plows. They don't have salt. They don't have all of the stuff that you need to handle winter storms.
Have you checked well, obviously you have, but the fact that they have 2 airports in Houston and both of them were shut down is definitely crazy to me to think about how just they're dealing with all of that. I have friends that live in Houston, and I was like, bro, You need to like make your faucet drip and all that stuff because I know y'all can't take care of the plumbing over there when it gets cold. So we that's a whole different story. But Chris, I do think we unfortunately have to get into the Hey Chris episode with
Let's go.
not so unfortunately questions from our subtexters who we enjoy hearing from each week. And Chris, there's a lot of trade conversation in today's episode. So I do want to get into the one question that I got to read beforehand that is not trade based, but
Okay.
it might be about the most likely trade piece that the Cavs could use. So the question, it says, do you think Jaylen Tyson has shown he deserves some more PT in non-garbage minutes? He seems to fill the Okoro role with ball handling. And I think it's interesting, right? Because there's two different Jaylen Tysons, I feel like we can say. There's one
Mm-hmm.
where he plays with the veterans on this squad, where he's playing alongside the Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garlands, Evan Mobley's, Jared Allen's of the world, where he's comfortable. He doesn't feel like he has to do too much. He knows his role. And I said this in a previous podcast, but when he's playing with that second unit or even the reserves at the end of a game, like Craig Porter Jr., Tristan Thompson, sometimes Luke Travers, JT Thor, those kinds of guys that are still trying to find their way into the NBA, into familiar roles. It feels like Jaylen Tyson might be pressing a little bit more and isn't focused on just one or two things. He's trying to do a lot more. So it's definitely interesting to see how he compares in those two different settings. But Chris, at this point, do you think he's earned more PT based on his play next to some of those regular guys?
No, I think Jaylen Tyson's playing time, Ethan, is going to be entirely dependent on who's available for the Cavs. And if Isaac Okoro is healthy and available, they understand the value of somebody like Isaac, especially when you talk about the defense that he brings, the toughness that he brings, the competitiveness that he brings. He's a good off-ball cutter. He's been a better three-point shooter this year. His averages have plummeted since coming back from the shoulder injury. So the 3-point numbers that he was putting up before the injury, very, very different than after the injury. But there's a belief in Isaac, and there's an idea that he has earned it. He has earned his spot, earned a consistent spot in this rotation. And if Jaylen Tyson is going to play, it would have to come at the expense of somebody, because Kenny Atkinson is already committed to playing 11 when he has 11 rotational guys that he believes have earned it, that deserve that playing time. So if there's a set 11 when this team is at full strength, who is Jaylen Tyson going to play in favor of? You're going to take minutes from Isaac. You're going to take minutes from Sam Merrill. You're going to take minutes from George Niang. It's just hard. He's in a situation where his playing time, his opportunities are not going to be consistent, and they're going to be predicated on what else happens with this roster. But I'll say this, like, it's only January. This is a long regular season. They play until April. So let's have the conversation again in a month. Let's have the conversation again in 6 weeks. Let's have the conversation again in 8 weeks. There could be a situation where some of these guys just aren't performing well enough for Kenny Atkinson to continue justifying their workload or their minutes, and he wants to give an opportunity to Jaylen because he sees things behind the scenes, because he sees things at practice, because he sees things, in late game situations where he wants to give him more of a look with the starters. I just don't think it's right now, considering everybody is having a hard enough time getting the kind of minutes that they probably want and that they've probably earned when this team is at full strength and when this team has the top 11 in the rotation available.
And I agree. I think it's definitely difficult to find Jaylen Tyson minutes. And obviously, he played well in the last game and had definitely meaningful minutes when you talk about his defensive pressure. And you like to see, especially how he's a player that doesn't take a whole lot to get boosted up, like energy wise. Like if he gets one stop or two stops, like you can see him fired up with the sideline, especially because he's a rookie and he's being claimed by everyone as their rookie. Like it's a different feeling. And then you saw him turn that from defense to offense and get rewarded with a 3-pointer of his own. He had 2 of them in the latest matchup. I just think you can't get overly caught up in the success of somebody that's 20. There's so many players on this roster, and that gets in to the trade conversations that we're talking about, Chris, and how that might not be the case before the trade deadline and all those different things. But I want to get into your opinion on a lot of these different questions that we have because they're directed at you, and we're trying to figure out where this Cavs team is going to go. So, Chris, the first one about the trade conversation comes from Matt in Nashville. He says, would you like to stand pat, make a major deal for a wing, or perhaps a minor deal for a backup big? Plus, what do you think the team will do? And obviously, I don't know if you want to give opinions, but to rephrase the question in a way that I feel like will be better for you to answer, what do you think is best for this team with the roster construction that they have to go after ahead of the trade deadline if they should make a move at all?
I think we've been talking about this since the beginning of the season. If they have an opportunity to add another two-way wing, somebody that matches up better with the likes of the Atlanta Hawks, the New York Knicks, the Boston Celtics, the Oklahoma City Thunder, those types of teams. The teams that have given the Cavs problems have an abundance of wings with length, athleticism, speed, quickness on the perimeter. So can you find somebody that's a little bit taller than Isaac Okoro, a little bit taller than Caris LeVert, somebody in that 6'7" to 6'9" frame, somebody with long, athletic, somebody who can knock down outside shots and space the floor. Like if there's somebody that fits that profile, I definitely think the Cavs have to consider that. I definitely think that the Cavs should explore that because here's the thing. For all of the success that they've had so far in this regular season, and this is delicate, Ethan, because team chemistry matters, because stylistic fit matters, because, rewarding guys for the way that they've played en route to this historic start, that matters too. But if we're looking ahead toward the playoffs, you have to ask yourself, how much can you count on George Niang? And George has been better defensively, and his teammates stuck up for him on the defensive end of the floor following the game against Minnesota, saying, look at his defensive rating, look at the way that he's being asked to go out there and switch. He has been better defensively this year. He's obviously a lot different in terms of appearance. He lost a lot of weight, so it allows him to better handle some of these perimeter matchups when he's asked to switch and have to guard guys out on the perimeter. So he deserves a lot of credit for transforming his body and becoming a better defensive player. He also gave credit to Damari Carroll, who, made his mark in the NBA on the defensive end of the floor. Those two guys watch film and watch various matchup-related things before every single game so that George has a better idea of tendencies, strengths and weaknesses, stuff like that. But I think there's a legitimate question about how much can the Cavs count on him when they get into a 7-game series. How much are teams going to continue to ruthlessly attack him when he's on the defensive end of the floor? And is he making enough shots offensively? Is he doing enough positive things at the other end of the floor to make it so that some of those deficiencies on the defensive end that still exist aren't as apparent? So he's somebody who is in the every night rotation. He is somebody who matters to the success of this team, and he is somebody who has helped stabilize the second unit. But when you get into a playoff environment, how much can you count on him? Isaac Okoro, the same questions exist. He shot the ball way better before his shoulder injury. His three-point percentage was extremely positive, trending in an upward direction. He wasn't as hesitant. He wasn't as indecisive. He wasn't doing those pump fake things and then just passing the ball and passing up some really, really good looks. So you saw, positive growth from Isaac Okoro. But we've seen the last two playoff series where he's gotten played off the court and played out of the rotation. So I think in the back of your mind, because there's no way to just spin this to April and just skip steps, the Cavs have to wonder, like, how much can we count on him when we get into a playoff environment, given what has happened in the past? Now, they can also say, well, he's a different player. He's shooting the ball better. He's getting more respect from opposing defenses. He can use his cutting and stuff like that to create some other kinds of offense rather than just being told to sit in the corner or sit behind the three-point arc or whatnot. But I do think in the back of the Cavs' mind, there has to be some kind of concern of, what's it going to be like for Isaac when we get into a playoff environment and defenses are going to just ignore him, or defenses are going to disrespect him, or defenses are going to change their coverages for these other four guys that share the floor on Isaac. What does that mean for our offense? And then you keep going down that list, and you have a few of these guys toward the back end of the rotation that you say, yeah, could be in the playoff rotation or maybe out of the playoff rotation. Sam Merrill, how's he going to hold up? Is he knocking down shots? Is he creating gravity? Is he creating a sense where the defense has to feel like they've got to give him their attention? All those different things. Like, how many minutes can he play in a playoff environment? So you have those questions with Sam. You have those questions with Isaac, and you have those questions with George. And they are every night rotations. Like, think about that. Those are players that the Cavs have counted on to this point in the season. Can they count on them the same way when you get into the playoffs? So if you have somebody that those questions don't exist with to the same level that is available, and you have the assets to go get that guy, then I think the Cavs have to explore it. The other layer to this whole thing, going back to the question, is who is the standout, needle-moving, two-way wing that, would significantly change the Cavs' chances of winning a championship? Like, who is that? Brandon Ingram, no. Like, I don't think stylistically he's a great fit. I think his money, his contract, makes it a little bit difficult as well for the Cavs. So it's like, if you want them to make this significant move, there has to be somebody out there that you feel like can make such a drastic difference that it's worth the Cavs going down that road where, they sacrifice a little bit of team chemistry. They sacrifice a little bit of their depth. They sacrifice, some guys in their rotation currently. And I just don't know who that is out there that is that appealing to them. It's not a couple of years ago where Donovan Mitchell was out there and the Cavs had to do it because they needed a player like him to take that next step. Like, if they don't make a move, am I going to sit here and say that the Cavs can't compete with any other team in the Eastern Conference? No, because I have enough other evidence that says they can compete with those teams. Even when you get into a playoff environment, even when you take into account all those different things that I said, they still, have the ability to be a really, really good defensive team, and they have the ability to be a very different offense than the one that we've seen in the playoffs the last couple of years. So I just don't know that the significant move exists out there for the Cavs, because I don't know that that player is out there for them to do that. And I also don't see enough motivation from the Cavs to make that kind of drastic roster change. To me, that's more reserved for the offseason if they don't have the kind of playoffs that everybody hopes that they will.
So I think it's interesting, Chris, because there's so many different layers to this conversation. Obviously, we can go the route where everybody's saying, hey, Cam Thomas is the guy that we need to go get for the Cavs. And that's the area that everybody, not only around the organization, but like fan base, and there has been articles written, there's been like fake trade proposals, all these other things. Cam Johnson is the person that everybody has their eyes on when it comes to the Cleveland Cavaliers. I believe they're like I think I saw it the other day. There was like betting odds for who's gonna get Cam Johnson, and like the
Sure.
Cavs were at the top of the list. I don't even remember which betting like odds thing this was, but
Hmm.
I think it's also interesting to like note like other players that the Cavs have had their eyes on and how fans have looked around and been like, hey, they would have changed the game for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Like Dorian Finney-Smith has been playing poorly with the Los Angeles
Right.
Lakers. And he's a guy that everybody had their eyes on. It was him or Cam Johnson. Obviously, Dorian Finney-Smith got traded to the Lakers, and he's averaging 5.9 points per game in 23 and a half minutes per game, 40% from the field, 36% from three, and he's averaging 2.9 rebounds, 1.3 assists. Like, if you would have put these, obviously, it arguably would have been different in Kenny Atkinson's system, in a different team base. You would have had a different role, all these different things. But like, what the Cavs fan base was looking at was his shooting numbers, was how he
Hmm.
was going to be able to space the floor, stretch the floor, while also playing defense. If you would tell any Cavs fan those numbers of Dorian Finney-Smith and say he was a part of the Cleveland Cavaliers, they want him to be traded. So I think you got to really have the conversation of, again, this is not only this season that the Cavs are talking about, they're talking about the
Right.
future of this team. And there's another subtext question that we're going to get into, talking about the first round pick in 2031 that the Cavs could be giving up for that. Like, that's a future first round pick, one of the only first round picks the Cavs have in the next 10 years.
Hmm.
Like, so I definitely think it's important to, while everybody looks at this season as championship, maybe are we at that point? Are we at championship or bust, Chris? Like, I don't know if that's where we are with this fan base. If they're saying like we need to make these changes because we have to win this season, or we're not going to be as productive. So I'm going to switch it back to the subtext questions because I feel like there's still things that we can answer based on what they have, and maybe it'll give me
Hmm.
more insight on the direction of what they want to happen. And the
Okay.
next one comes from Ben from Akron, and he says, if they make a move, who are the Cavs more likely to trade if you had to rank the following players based on likeliest to be traded? Sam Merrill, Isaac Okoro, Caris LeVert. And this is a little bit tricky, right? Because it depends on if we're talking about money, if we're talking about salary, if we're talking about expiring contracts, then Caris LeVert would be at the front of that, right? And then Sam Merrill just got a guaranteed deal for this season. Isaac Okoro just signed an extension, even though that was, or a new deal, that even though that is a tradable contract, it's definitely
Hmm.
still like they have to understand that Isaac was the number 5 overall pick for them, a homegrown player, and all those different little things that matter to organizations when it comes to trading pieces. But Chris, if you had to rank it, Sam Merrill, Isaac Okoro, Caris LeVert, who are you saying that the Cavs are likeliest to trade?
I'd say Caris LeVert number one, Isaac Okoro number two, and Sam Merrill number three, just because I think that's how the rest of the NBA will value those guys. Um, because here's the thing: if you're trading for a player at the deadline, chances are that player's not coming from a contender, right? That player is coming from a team that is ready to go a different direction, a team that is playing for lottery balls, a team that, has a more ready-made player, but they're not going to be competitive during that player's window while he's there. So what do they want in return? They want salary cap relief. They want young, controllable assets. They want future draft capital. uh, Sam Merrill is none of the above, right? And I mean, like, you can sit here and you can say, well, he's got an expiring contract. It's $2 million. What does that do for a team? Very, very little. So, I think Sam Merrill potentially a salary filler to get another $2 million in salary aggregation. But aside from that, like, I don't think there's that much appeal in terms of a team trading for Sam Merrill. Caris LeVert is. Caris LeVert, let's say hypothetically that the Cavs continue to go down the road of Cam Johnson. And everybody knows that has listened to this podcast, the Cavs have loved Cam Johnson for a half decade now, that they have been involved in Cam Johnson trade conversations with the Brooklyn Nets for as long as Cam Johnson has been with Brooklyn. And before that, the Cavs were having conversations with the Phoenix Suns about Cam Johnson. And before that, the Cavs were hoping that they were going to draft Cam Johnson when he came into the NBA. So there is an appeal to Cam. He fits the kind of player that they could certainly use in a playoff series, an NBA Finals matchup against Oklahoma City, a playoff series against Boston. He's the type of player that plays in that series and has a big impact, theoretically, in that series, because he's the kind of player that typically can give the Cavs problems. If you're playing against the Atlanta Hawks, he can deal with DeAndre Hunter and Jalen Johnson and Bogdan Bogdanovic and some of those other guys, Dyson Daniels. So it's clear that the Cavs are interested in Cam Johnson, and they have been for a long time. So if you're talking about that type of trade in particular, like Caris LeVert appeals to Brooklyn, not because, he's an asset that helps them win games, but because he's got an expiring contract and it gives them salary cap flexibility. Jaylen Tyson is a player that appeals to Brooklyn because it's a young player, a former first-round pick, on a team-friendly, controllable contract for the next couple of years. Those guys are incredibly valuable. Isaac Okoro is appealing to a team like Brooklyn because it's a young player that fits their timeline. He's on a team-friendly contract. Nobody's going to look at Isaac Okoro and say that his contract is not, quote-unquote, tradable, because it is a team-friendly contract that gives a team, a cost-controlled situation for the next couple of years. And the Cavs have a future first-round pick that they could dangle to Brooklyn as well. That appeals to Brooklyn. So I think when you're talking about whether it's Cam Johnson or any of these other players that continue to get linked to the Cavs, they're coming from teams that are ready to shift into a rebuild or aren't going to be competitive for another couple of years. And they look at Caris LeVert as an asset. They look at Isaac Okoro as an asset. Those would be the guys that if the Cavs go down the road of potentially making an addition at the trade deadline, those are the guys that would be most appealing to some of these teams that they would be having conversations with. Not so much a guy like Sam Merrill. Not so much a guy like, everybody's throwing Tristan Thompson in these hypothetical fake trades. Not a guy like George Niang, who continues to get thrown in these hypothetical fake trades. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to appeal to what it is the other team wants out of this deal. And there's one more thing when it comes to Cam Johnson. There is an argument, Ethan, that he is the most coveted player on the market. There's an argument to be made of. So there are so many teams that are going to be in on Cam Johnson. And it's not, do the Cavs have the kind of package that satisfies Brooklyn? It's, do the Cavs have the package that is going to win those sweepstakes, that is going to win the bidding war, that is going to make Brooklyn say yes to them more so than any other team that is out there? Indiana, Sacramento, Memphis, Oklahoma City. It just feels like to me, and you never say never, but it feels like to me, all of those teams that I just said are going to have something more appealing to offer Brooklyn at the end of the day. That if Brooklyn is going to say yes to a Cam Johnson deal, and they don't have to say yes to a Cam Johnson deal, they can just keep him. His value is not going to go down. He's still going to be a valuable commodity around the NBA. The style of player that he is, every team in the NBA wants that. So they don't have to trade him. They can say, we're going to hang on to him. You kidding me? Unless you give us an offer that we're going to say yes to, that is good enough for us to say yes to, we're just going to keep him. So are the Cavs really going to cobble something together that is going to be the best offer that any interested Cam Johnson suitor is going to have for them, personally, I find that hard to believe. Again, you never say never, but I find that hard to believe unless the Cavs bring in a third team or a fourth team or something along those lines, and then that gets really complicated.
Chris, like that's a really good point when you talk about the Brooklyn Nets keeping him, because if he's their best player, which he is, right, the best player on their squad and who they have currently, unless you want to argue about D'Angelo Russell, and it's still in that conversation. I think I'm taking.
Don't think anybody wants to make that argument.
Nope. So I think like you think about the rebuild that they're trying to go out and reconstruct, and it's like, well, who are you building around? Because you can't just blow up the entire roster and say, okay, everybody get out of here. We're going to bring in all new different pieces. Like, it's very difficult to, and that's why we keep talking about how great this run is for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Not 4 years ago, they were dealing with the same situation until J.B. Bickerstaff helped create foundation and trust and just everything that they had going on, and then allowed them to go to the play-in, Eastern Conference first round, Eastern Conference semifinals. Obviously, the last 2 seasons were with Donovan Mitchell, so that expedited all the processes. But a rebuild takes years. Yeah. Like, a rebuild is not going to be like if you get Cooper Flagg, or if you get Ace Bailey, or if you get one of these top guys out of college, that you're automatically be like, okay, yeah, now we're ready to compete for a playoff spot. Like, that's not how it works. So the Brooklyn Nets, the opportunity for them to potentially like keep Cam Johnson and build around him is also something that you have to keep in mind. And obviously you need all these different positions to be filled, but you understand who is the most valuable to you and what you're going to be able to get. But are you willing to wait for teams to give you a 2031 first round pick 6 years from now? You would have to wait to cash in on that, right? And there's these other teams that have other first round options. I forget which team it was. It might be the Pistons or the Thunder that have 12 picks.
I mean, the Thunder have as many picks as any human can possibly have.
So, like, and there was a trade earlier today, I believe it was, for more picks. So it just makes no sense for the Cavs to have what other teams are looking for, or what teams are going to want for a guy like Cam Johnson, who is the last man standing of a team that you feel like you might want to build around. So
yeah, I mean, you have to make it worth it for Brooklyn. So I understand, Cavs fans are like, I don't know about Jaylen Tyson. You're going to have to give something up of value, something that fits their timeline. And Jaylen Tyson is the most logical fit for a Brooklyn trade. And it would make sense. They're not getting Evan Mobley. They're not getting Darius Garland. So it would make sense for them to get, the best expendable young player that the Cavs have on their roster, and that type of deal. And if you're going to get a guy who is the most valuable commodity on the trade market, it's going to be painful at some point. Like, it's not just going to be throw a bunch of slop together and they're just going to take it because they're a bad basketball team. No. It doesn't work like that. Anything, if that's the direction that the Cavs are going to go, like, anything that they would give up, they would probably feel like is a subtraction, either in the here and now or in the future. And the Caris LeVert piece of that, it's difficult, right? Because he's the sixth man, because he's really, really important to what they do offensively and defensively. But if you're having any kind of conversation about Cam Johnson, understand he makes between $20 and $25 million. So you have to find a way to make it legal. So you need somebody with a pretty big contract. It's not going to be Jared Allen. It's not going to be Darius. It's not going to be Donovan. It's not going to be Evan. So where else do you turn? Well, you could sit there and say Max Strus, but Max isn't as appealing to Brooklyn because his contract's not expiring the way that Caris is. So, when you're talking about these young rebuilding teams, like I said, they want salary cap flexibility. They want future draft capital. They want young, controllable talent. Those are the things that appeal most to them. And anything that the Cavs, if they go down that road, anything that they would do would be painful. And it would be looked at, as much as it's an addition and it's a benefit to the team to get that type of player, it would also be looked at in some corners as a subtraction. And they would have to rework their lineup. They would have to rework their rotation. And there's a legitimate question as to whether, that's something that they're willing to do, and if that's something that they think is going to benefit them.
All right, Chris, we're going to wrap this podcast up with one final question from Anu in San Francisco, because it's the last question that has trade talks or trade feel to it, but it actually might be the smartest question that we've gotten today.
Okay.
Anu says, considering salary cap next year, are we going to lose both Ty Jerome and Caris LeVert next year? And basically turn those spots over to CPJ and Jaylen Tyson? If yes, does it make sense to get some draft capital for at least one of those players now? Referring to Caris LeVert and Ty Jerome.
I think there's a chance that the Cavs, look, I mean, their salary cap situation is one that everybody has to monitor. And it's something that the Cavs have to pay attention to. And the rules that exist today are not the same ones that existed 10 years ago when the Cavs had the big three together and they were just spending wildly. But I will say this, within the rules, within the limitations of the new salary cap structure, and in a way that it doesn't harm team building and it's not too restrictive for the Cavs, Dan Gilbert's going to spend. When the team is worth spending on, when the team is competing for championships, he's going to do the things that the top owners in the NBA are willing to do. So, the benefit of somebody like Caris, somebody like Ty, is that the Cavs would control them and they would be able to bring them back and go a little bit over the salary cap, a little bit over the tax. Again, you have to worry about both aprons, but I've had multiple conversations with multiple people around the NBA that do this for a living, really, really smart when it comes to the salary cap, and they believe that there is a path to the Cavs bringing Caris LeVert back in the offseason. And there's also a belief that Caris would want to come back. Obviously, he loves Kenny Atkinson. He's very close with Donovan Mitchell. He loves being around the guys. He wants to compete for championships. It's a very, very comfortable role that he's been put in. So there are benefits to Caris, coming back and maybe taking a little bit less than what market value would say he's worth. And then Ty Jerome becomes a little bit tricky because I think it just kind of depends as this season continues to unfold. Is he the guy that in October and November we were having conversations about sixth man of the year, probably out of the Cavs price range? Or is he a guy that's looked at around the NBA saying, yeah, I guess in certain situations we could consider him a backup point guard, but no, he's more of a third guard. If he's viewed as a backup point guard, the market is going to determine that his price is a little bit higher, right? We're talking about what, $8 to $12 million annually, something like that. But if the market says, there's no logical landing spot for a contending team that is going to consider him a backup point guard, he's more the third guard, then we're talking about a price range between like 5 to 8 million per year. And it changes the math, and it changes, I think, the Cavs' willingness to bring him back and the Cavs' likelihood of bringing him back. So I think it just kind of depends on, the way he continues to play. How involved is he going to be in this push? How involved is he going to be in this rotation? Is he going to get 18 to 20 minutes a night, or is he going to get 12 to 14 minutes a night? The other thing that we have to consider when it comes to this offseason coming up is how many of the legitimate contending teams because a lot of these guys are going to want to play for winners and have a chance to compete for it. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes they just have to take what's available to them. But, if they have their choice, they're going to want to play for a team that has a legitimate chance to compete here. How many of those teams are going to have the kind of salary cap flexibility to go out and give Ty Jerome $10 million a year?
So, Chris, can I ask you this?
Sure.
Do you think it means that Ty Jerome will, even though he's not a restricted free agent, will kind of do the same thing that Isaac Okoro did this summer and get a gauge of where other teams are and weigh the options and then say, well, if I can make a little less money with the Cavs, but be around my best friend in the NBA and Donovan Mitchell, and say I have a contention to be in the NBA Finals again or reach the NBA Finals this coming season, that would be something that he would be interested in or rather do than go to a different team where you don't necessarily know what the opportunities may come. And in your second or now third year with a team, second year with a head coach, you have an understanding of where you might fit into the rotation and all those things.
Sure. I think that's absolutely a possibility. We can't sit here and pretend that we know what's in these guys' heads and what's in these guys' hearts. But I can tell you that not every free agent is going to be looking for the same thing. There are a number of different factors that play into any free agency decision, whether it's Caris LeVert, whether it's Ty Jerome. For some guys, market plays into it. For other guys, money plays into it. For other guys, system and opportunity plays into it. For other guys, coach, relationships, that sort of thing plays into it. And for some guys, it's a mixture of all of those things. You know what I mean? So there are like different things that each guy is looking for. And it's just a matter of like, which one of those is going to win the day? Which one of those is going to drive the decision? I think you can make an argument that Ty hasn't found a permanent home in the NBA. He's been a bit of a nomad. So maybe the fact of an opportunity to stay in Cleveland for another 2-3 years, and then it's 4 or 5 years in the same place, maybe that appeals to him. I don't know. It's hard to get a general sense, or it's hard to get a specific sense when it's such a general thing, free agency. And, sometimes the market is going to dictate, as you said, Ethan, sometimes the market is going to dictate ultimately what a guy decides to do. He may go into free agency and say, I've got an opportunity to cash in. I've got an opportunity to get into, a bigger market. I've got an opportunity to get a bigger role from a different team. And then the market says, no, you don't, bud. So I think we have to kind of like let this one play out. One other factor when it comes to Ty Jerome is, he plays a position that's usually pretty deep. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I've studied every free agent that is going to be available this coming off season, especially at the point guard spot. And this is no disrespect to Ty, I find it hard to believe that, he would be one of the most attractive free agent point guards on this market coming up. Because he's just not that kind of player. He's not viewed that kind of way across the NBA. So the pool of candidates that occupy the same position, that is also going to play a part in ultimately what he decides to do this offseason. But I think that's a long way of saying that I do think there is a pathway, even though it would get expensive and even though it may require some salary cap gymnastics. I do think there's a pathway to the Cavs bringing back Caris LeVert and Ty Jerome this offseason.
All right, Chris. We appreciate all your insight and all your added opinions on the Cavs, especially with being around them. And we hope that you can get to your flight safely and whether or not they allow you on the flight. I hope it's either allows you to take off or it gets canceled so you don't have to deal with delays and trying to figure out all those different things. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast and another rendition of Hey Chris. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where if you want to argue about the Cam Johnson trade, if you want to argue about the potential for all these different players for the Cavs to have on the market, if you want to talk about 2, 3, 4 team deals throughout before the trade deadline comes up, this is where you can do it, and we can respond directly to your phone with our opinions, and we can be as blunt as possible with you through text message as well. So if you want this different kind of insight, if you want this kind of conversation and to join the Cavs community that we have created, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who signed up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.